Before he became Pope Leo XIV, before the world ever heard his name echo through St. Peter's Square, before the cameras turned toward the balcony and the bells rang out to announce a new Holy Father, he was simply Roberto. Among his classmates and teachers at the Catholic Theological Union in Chicago, he was known as Bob. He was not the loudest student in the room. He's not the most attention-seeking, but he was one of the most thoughtful. A young man with a clear, quiet purpose. A seminarian who carried with him not pride, but a deep hunger for God and a willingness to serve wherever he was needed. Among the few people who really knew him in those early years is Sister Diane Bergant. She isn't just a former professor. She is a highly respected biblical scholar and teacher. For over 45 years, she helped form the minds of priests, ministers, religious, and lay leaders in the Catholic Church. And among the many students she guided through scripture and theological reflection, one of them would go on to become Pope. Not because he aimed for it, not because he wanted status, but because, even back then, he was someone different, serious, humble, faithful. Sister Diane taught him the fundamentals, courses like Introduction to the Old Testament and the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible. These were not casual or surface-level classes. These were the courses that helped students, including young Roberto, learn how to approach Scripture not just as words on a page, but as the living voice of God speaking into the world. When Roberto came into her class in 1978, he had already studied with the Augustinians and had been part of a strong academic tradition at Villanova. But academic knowledge is not the same as spiritual formation. And that's where Sister Diane came in. She saw that Roberto had both the education and the heart. He was prepared to learn, not just facts, but meaning. Not just text, but truth. Not just knowledge, but wisdom. He didn't stand out for flashy behavior or attention-grabbing answers. He stood out for his seriousness, his dedication, his willingness to listen, to ponder, to wrestle with the big questions. What does this passage mean? What does it ask of me? How does this scripture speak to a world full of suffering, doubt, and searching? These are the kinds of questions Sister Diane invited her students to ask. Roberto was one of the students who truly engaged. The classroom was a sacred place for her. She didn't just want to give lectures. She wanted her students to think. Theologically, to understand not just what the Bible said, but how it spoke to them today. She asked them to dig deep, and Roberto did. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was trying to understand God more deeply. And it showed. Sister Diane is a meticulous person. She has kept every grade sheet she ever made, every class list, every student record. Not for status or nostalgia, but because she believed each student mattered. She saw teaching not just as a job, but as a calling. Each name on those sheets represented a future minister, someone who would preach, serve, lead, or counsel others. And one day, as she looked through those old lists, she realized she had taught the Pope. She still remembers the moment when it all became real. The day the white smoke rose. The day the world waited to hear the name. The day the voice came through the speakers and said, Roberto Francescus. At that moment, something inside her shifted. It was not pride. It was not shock. It was something deeper. A flood of emotion that words could not explain. She remembers thinking, I taught him. I taught the Pope how to read Scripture. To understand the Bible, it was overwhelming. It's not because she saw herself as important, but because the moment was so deeply unexpected. After all, whoever expects one of their students to become Pope, it's not something you imagine when you're correcting essays or leading class discussions. But there it was. It's the quiet young man from her classroom had become the Holy Father. And he hadn't changed much. That same thoughtfulness, that same quiet strength, was still there. Sister Diane says he was never the kind of person to draw attention to himself. He didn't rush to speak. He was always respectful, always ready, always present, a student. Not because he cared about grades, but because he took the work seriously, because he respected the sacred texts, because he believed this wasn't just education, it was preparation for service.
Yes.
After ordination, Roberto Franzascus did something most people in his position wouldn't have. He left the comfort of familiar places and went to Peru. He lived among the poor. He worked alongside communities that had little material wealth, but deep spiritual hunger. For over 20 years, he stayed there, not as a guest, but as a servant. And for Sister Diane, this was no surprise. That was the kind of person he had always been. He wasn't called to the spotlight. He was called to mission. Now that he is Pope Leo XIV, it's clear that those roots never left him. The man who now leads the Catholic Church is still the same person who sat in a classroom, quietly listening, asking thoughtful questions, taking notes. Reflecting on the Word, his leadership is not loud or showy, is gentle but firm, reflective but decisive, rooted in Scripture and shaped by prayer. At CTU, students came from many communities. During that time, over 25 different religious groups sent their seminarians there. The Augustinians, the group Roberto belonged to, were one of the larger ones. They had chosen to be part of the Catholic Theological Union, which had formed out of a desire for shared learning, shared mission, and shared commitment to building the church. In that diverse and dynamic setting, Roberto quietly made his mark, not by being the center of attention, but by being reliable, sincere, and deeply engaged. He was the kind of student teachers remember not because he was dramatic or bold, but because he was thoughtful and consistent. And it's this consistency that has marked his journey all the way to the papacy. Sister Diane remembers him well. She remembers his papers, his test scores, his punctuality. But more than that, she remembers his spirit, a man of faith, a man of patience, a man who listened more than he spoke, a man who served without seeking reward. And now, as he takes on one of the most visible roles in the world, those same qualities are shaping how he leads. Pope Leo XIV is not trying to make a name for himself. He is trying to point the church back to what matters. He is restoring reverence. To the Mass, encouraging silence, focusing on prayer. Guiding the church not through force, but through faithfulness. Sister Diane sees this and nods. She remembers. She knows where it comes from. She knows how it was formed. And she is at peace, knowing that the young man she once taught is leading the church with the same humility he showed decades ago. Her story reminds us that formation matters, that classrooms matter, that every quiet moment of teaching and learning can have a ripple effect far beyond what we imagine. It reminds us that the work of teachers, mentors, and guides is sacred. This is not just a story about a nun and her student. It is a story about the quiet power of faith, the value of humble formation, the strength of those who serve without seeking titles or applause. Sister Diane didn't set out to make history. She set out to teach Scripture, to guide her students into a deeper relationship with the Word, and in doing so, she helped shape the soul of a future pope. Even now, she speaks not with pride, but with quiet gratitude. She knows she played a small part in something much bigger, and that is enough. As we reflect on the life and leadership of Pope Leo XIV, we also honor those who walked with him along the way. People like Sister Diane, people who believed in him, taught him, guided him, and helped him hear God's call more clearly. These stories remind us that no act of teaching, no moment of learning is wasted. Every lesson, every conversation, every act of formation is a step toward something greater. In the case of Sister Diane and Roberto Franzascus, it was a step toward the papacy. And now, as the world watches Pope Leo lead the church, we can look back and see the roots, the classroom desks, the scripture studies, the quiet prayers, thoughtful questions. All of it was preparation. All of it was part of the journey. So today, we give thanks not just for leaders, but for those who helped form them. Not just for popes, but for the professors who helped them hear the voice of God. For every Sister Diane out there, shaping the future one student at a time, we say thank you. May their work continue to bear fruit. May their stories remind us of the power of faithfulness, and may we all be inspired to play our part, however quiet it may be, in the unfolding story of God's church. If you'd like me to help convert this into subtitles, create a voiceover-friendly version, or break it into